Story of a Soul by St. Thérèse of the Child Jesus and the Holy Face. A modern translation by Michael Kress. Chapter 2. Every detail of my mother's illness remains vivid in my heart. I especially remember the final weeks of her life. Céline and I were like two little exiles. Every morning, Madame X would come to fetch us, and we would spend the day at her house. One day, we hadn't had time to say our morning prayers before leaving. On the way there, my little sister whispered to me, "Should we tell her we didn't say our prayers?" I answered, "Oh yes, we should." So, very timidly, Céline told our hostess the truth. She said at once, "Well then, little girls, go ahead and say your prayers." And she left us in a big room. Céline looked at me in astonishment, and I was just as surprised. I cried out, "Oh, it's not like Mama." She always said our prayers with us. Even with the distractions offered to us during the day, our thoughts kept returning to our beloved mother. I remember one time when Céline was given a beautiful apricot. She leaned over to me and said, "Let's not eat it. I'll save it for Mama." But alas, our beloved mother was already too ill to enjoy earthly fruits. She was preparing to be filled forever with the glory of God and to drink with Jesus the mysterious wine he spoke of at the Last Supper, promising to share it with us in the kingdom of his Father. The moving ceremony of the last rites is engraved on my soul. I still remember the spot where I knelt, and I can still hear the sobs of my poor father. My mother left this world on August 28, 1877, at the age of 46. The next day, my dear father took me in his arms and said, "Come, say one last goodbye to your dear little mother." Without saying a word, I pressed my lips to her cold forehead. I don't remember crying much. I spoke to no one about the deep feelings filling my heart. I just watched and listened in silence. I also saw many things people thought they were hiding from me. At one point, I found myself alone in front of the coffin, standing upright in the hallway. I stood there for a long time, staring. I had never seen a coffin before, yet I understood. I was so small that I had to lift my head just to see the whole thing, and to me it looked enormous and so very sad. 15 years later, I stood before another coffin this time, that of our Holy Mother Geneviève, and I felt like I was back in my childhood again. All the memories rushed into my mind. It was the same little Thérèse looking, but now she had grown. The coffin seemed small now. She no longer had to look up to see it. She now lifted her eyes only to the heavens, which looked bright and full of joy. For suffering had matured and strengthened her soul so deeply that nothing on earth could sadden her any more. On the day the Church blessed my mother's body, God did not leave me completely orphaned. He gave me another mother and let me choose her freely. We were all gathered together, the 5 of us sisters, looking at each other in sorrow. Our housekeeper, moved with compassion, looked at Céline and me and said, "Poor little ones, you don't have a mother anymore." Immediately, Céline ran into Marie's arms and cried out, "Well then you'll be our mother." I had always followed Céline in everything, and I ought to have imitated her in such a right and tender gesture. But I thought perhaps Pauline would feel left out. She wouldn't have a little one to love her like a daughter. So I looked at her with affection, buried my little head against her heart, and said softly, "For me, Pauline will be Mama." As I mentioned earlier, this marked the beginning of the second phase of my life, the most painful one, especially after Pauline entered Carmel. This period spans from the age of 4½ to my 14th year, when I regained my childlike joy, even while understanding more deeply the seriousness of life. I must tell you, dear mother, that immediately after Mama's death, my cheerful personality completely changed. I had been lively and outgoing, but I became quiet, gentle, and extremely sensitive. A single glance was enough to bring me to tears. I didn't want anyone paying attention to me, and I couldn't stand the presence of strangers. I only felt happy when I was with my family. At home, I was still surrounded by the greatest tenderness. My father's already loving heart seemed to take on a mother's gentleness, and my sisters became like the most selfless, tender mothers to me. Ah, if God hadn't surrounded his little flower with such warm, nurturing light, she never could have taken root on this earth. Still too fragile to endure rain and storms, she needed warmth, gentle dew, and spring breezes, and God gave her these blessings even under the snow of sorrow. Soon, my father decided to leave Alençon and move us to Lisieux to be closer to my uncle, Mama's brother. He made this sacrifice so that our dear aunt could help guide my older sisters and serve, in a way, as a mother to us all. I didn't feel any sadness about leaving my hometown. Children love change and anything out of the ordinary, so I was quite excited about going to Lisieux. I still remember the trip, our arrival at my uncle's home that evening, and how my little cousins, Jean and Marie, waited at the door with my aunt to welcome us. Oh, how touched I was by their affection. The next day we were taken to our new home, Les Buissonets, a quiet place near a lovely park called the Jardin de l'Étoile. The house my father had rented seemed charming to me. It had a little tower with a view that stretched out over the countryside, an English-style garden in the front, and a large vegetable garden behind the house. To my young imagination, it was a whole new world. And truly, this cheerful home became the setting for many sweet memories and unforgettable family moments. Before, I felt like an exile. I wept, and I knew I no longer had a mother. But at Les Buissonets, my little heart opened up again, and I began to smile at life once more. From the moment I woke up, I was surrounded by the loving caresses of my sisters. Then I would say my prayers with them. After that, I had reading lessons with Pauline. I still remember that the word heaven was the first I could read all by myself. As soon as class was done, I'd run up to the little tower, Papa's usual retreat. Oh, how happy I was when I could bring him good news about my lessons. Every afternoon, we would take a walk together and visit the Blessed Sacrament, one day in one church, the next day in another. That's how I first entered the Carmelite chapel. "See, my little queen," Papa said. "Behind that big grill are holy nuns who are always praying to God." I had no idea that 9 years later I would be one of them, that in that very Carmel I would receive so many graces. After our walk we returned home, and I would do my schoolwork. Then, for the rest of the day, I danced happily around my dear Papa in the garden. I didn't know how to play with dolls. My favorite activity was making herbal teas with seeds and tree bark. When the color of the mixture turned out just right, I'd run to offer it to Papa in a little teacup that looked so beautiful, you'd think the drink was actually delicious. My dear father would stop his work, smile, and pretend to drink it. I also loved tending flowers. I would build little altars in a nook in the garden wall, perfectly placed for a child's devotion. When everything was arranged, I'd run to Papa, who would marvel, just to make me happy, at what I thought were my masterpiece altars. I could go on and on with 1,000 such little memories. How can I describe all the tenderness my incomparable father lavished on his little queen? Some of my happiest days were when my beloved king, as I liked to call him, took me fishing. Sometimes I tried to fish with my own tiny line, but most often I preferred sitting quietly on the flower-covered grass. My thoughts would run deep. Though I didn't yet know what meditation was, my soul entered into a true kind of prayer. I listened to the distant sounds, the murmur of the wind. Sometimes military music from the town would reach me faintly, filling me with a gentle melancholy. The world felt like a place of exile, and I dreamed of heaven. The afternoons passed quickly. Before long, it was time to return to Les Buissonets. But before we packed up, I would have my snack from the little basket I brought with me. Alas, the beautiful jam tart my sisters had made would often look quite different by then. Its bright color had faded, and it looked pale and wilted. Then the world would seem even sadder to me, and I would understand, deep in my heart, that only in heaven is joy unchanging and without shadow. Speaking of clouds, I remember one day when the blue sky over the countryside darkened. A thunderstorm rolled in with flashes of lightning and loud crashes of thunder. I turned this way and that, trying not to miss a single part of that majestic display. I even saw lightning strike a nearby field. Far from being afraid, I was thrilled. It felt as though God himself was very near to me. My dear father, however, was less thrilled. He came to lift me from my trance. The grass and tall daisies, taller than I was, were already glittering with raindrop jewels, and we still had to cross several meadows to reach the road. So he picked me up in his arms, despite all his fishing gear. From there, I looked down at the sparkling diamonds in the grass, wishing I could be drenched in them, covered from head to toe in that shining light. I think I forgot to mention, dear mother, that during my daily walks, both in Alençon and in Lisieux, I often gave alms to the poor. One day we saw an elderly man hobbling along on crutches. I walked up to give him my little coin. He looked at me with a long, sorrowful gaze, then shook his head with a sad smile and refused the offering. I can't describe what went on in my heart. I wanted so badly to help and comfort him, and instead I might have embarrassed or hurt him. I think he understood my feelings, because I soon saw him turn back to me and smile from afar. Just then, Papa had bought me a pastry, and I longed to run and give it to the old man. He didn't want money, I thought, but surely he would like a cake. Still some hesitation held me back. My heart was so full I could hardly keep from crying. Then I remembered hearing that on the day of First Communion, one could ask God for anything and receive it. That thought comforted me immediately. Even though I was only 6, I said to myself, I'll pray for my poor man on my First Communion day. And 5 years later, I kept my promise. I've always believed that my childlike prayer for that suffering member of Christ was heard and blessed. As I grew, I loved God more and more. I often gave him my heart using a little prayer my mother had taught me. I tried to please Jesus in everything I did, and was careful never to offend him. Still, one day I committed a fault worth telling here. It humbles me even now, but I believe I felt true contrition for it. It was May 1878. Since my sisters thought I was too little to go to the evening devotions for the month of Mary, I stayed home with the maid and said my prayers before my own little altar, which I arranged myself. Everything was tiny candlesticks, flower pots, and so on, so just 2 matchstick candles gave plenty of light. Sometimes Victoire, to save my supply of matches, would surprise me with 2 real stubs of candles, but that was rare. One evening, as we were about to start, I said, "Would you begin the memorar? I'll light the candles." She pretended to start, then just looked at me and burst out laughing. Meanwhile, my precious matches were burning away, and I begged her again to say the prayer quickly. Still silence. More laughter. Outraged, I jumped up, stamped my foot, and shouted, "Victoire, you're mean!" She didn't feel like laughing anymore. She stared at me in shock and, too late, showed me the surprise, the 2 little candle stubs hidden under her apron. I cried in anger at first, and then in sorrow. I was ashamed and deeply sorry, and I made a firm resolution never to act that way again. Shortly afterward, I went to confession for the first time, a memory I treasure. Pauline told me, "Little Thérèse, you're not speaking to a man, but to the good God himself." I believed her so fully that I seriously asked if I should tell Father D that I loved him with all my heart, since it was really God I would be talking to through him. I was well prepared and knew just what to do. I went into the confessional and turned to face the priest directly so I could see him clearly. I made my confession and received absolution with great faith, because my sister had assured me that, in that solemn moment, the tears of little Jesus would wash my soul clean. I remember the advice the priest gave me. He especially encouraged devotion to the Blessed Virgin, and I resolved to love her even more tenderly than I already did. Finally, I passed my little rosary through the grill, so it'd be blessed. When I left the confessional, I was so joyful and light-hearted, more than I had ever felt before. It was evening, and under the street lamp I stopped, pulled the newly blessed rosary from my pocket, and examined it from every angle. "What are you looking at, little Thérèse?" Pauline asked. "I'm trying to see what a blessed rosary looks like." My sisters laughed, amused by my innocence. As for me, I remained deeply moved by the grace I had received. After that, I wanted to go to confession on every major feast day, and each one filled my soul with such joy. Feast days. Oh, what sweet memories that word brings to mind. I loved them so much. My sisters were so good at explaining the beautiful mysteries behind each celebration. To me, those days on earth became little glimpses of heaven. Above all, I loved the processions of the Blessed Sacrament. What joy it was to scatter flower petals before the feet of the good God. But before letting them fall, I would throw my flowers high into the air, and I was never happier than when I saw my rose petals brushing against the sacred monstrance. Sundays. Ah, if the great feast days were rare, there was one celebration that returned every week and was especially dear to my heart. Sunday, what a radiant day! It was the Lord's Day, a day of rest. Each Sunday, our whole family went to High Mass. I remember that when the sermon began, since our chapel was far from the pulpit, we had to move down into the nave to find seats, which wasn't easy. But for little Thérèse and her father, people always made room and quickly offered us chairs. My uncle would light up when he saw us coming. He called me his little ray of sunshine, and said that seeing that venerable patriarch leading his tiny daughter by the hand was a sight that brought him joy. As for me, I didn't care about being watched. I only wanted to listen carefully to the priest. The first sermon I ever understood, and that touched me deeply, was about the Passion of our Lord. I was 5.5 at the time, and after that I was able to grasp and enjoy all the homilies. Whenever the preacher mentioned Saint Teresa, my father would lean down and whisper, "Listen well, my little queen, they're talking about your holy patroness." And I did listen, but I have to admit, I spent more time watching Papa than the preacher. His noble face spoke volumes. Sometimes his eyes would fill with tears that he tried in vain to hold back. As he listened to eternal truths, he seemed no longer to belong to this world. His soul was already absorbed in another. Alas, the end of his journey was still far off. Many long, sorrowful years had to pass before heaven's gates opened to him, and the Lord, with his own hand, wiped away the bitter tears of his faithful servant. Returning to my Sunday, that joyful day always passed too quickly, and it had a bittersweet ending. My happiness lasted unspoiled until Compline. But once that evening office began, a sense of sadness would come over me. I thought about how the next day we'd have to start everything over, lessons, work, routine. My heart felt the burden of earthly exile, and I longed for heaven, for that eternal Sunday where there is no sunset. Before going back to Les Buissonets, my aunt would invite each of us, one at a time, to spend the evening at her house. I was thrilled when it was my turn. I listened with great delight to everything my uncle said. His serious conversations fascinated me, though I'm sure he had no idea how closely I was paying attention. Still, my joy came with a little fear when he would sit me on one of his knees and thunder out Bluebeard in a terrifying voice. Around 8 o'clock, Papa would come to get me. I remember looking up at the stars with indescribable wonder. One cluster in particular, Orion's belt, delighted me. I thought it looked like the letter T, and I would say on the way home, "Look, Papa, my name is written in the sky." Then, not wanting to look any more at the dull old earth, I would ask him to guide me. Without watching my steps, I would lift my head high, never tiring of gazing into the starry sky. What can I say about the winter evenings at Les Buissonets? After a game of checkers, my sisters would read to us from the liturgical year, and then from another book that was both interesting and instructive. During the reading, I would sit on Papa's lap, and when it ended, he would sing sweet lullabies in his beautiful voice to help me fall asleep. I would rest my head on his heart while he rocked me gently. Eventually, we'd go upstairs to say our prayers. I always had my place beside my good father. I only had to watch him to know how saints pray. Afterward, Pauline would tuck me into bed, and I'd ask her the same questions every night. Was I good today? Is the good God happy with me? Will the little angels fly around me tonight? She always answered yes. Otherwise, I would have cried the whole night through. After this little interrogation, my sisters would kiss me good night, and little Thérèse was left alone in the dark. I consider it a true grace that I was taught from childhood to overcome my fears. Sometimes Pauline would send me alone at night to fetch something from a far-off room. She didn't allow any refusal, and that was just what I needed, because otherwise I would have grown up very fearful. As it is, it's now quite hard to frighten me. I often wonder how my little mother, Pauline, managed to raise me with such love without spoiling me. She never overlooked my faults, but she also never scolded me unfairly. I always knew she wouldn't go back on something once decided. This beloved sister was the one I confided everything to. She answered all my questions. One day I told her I didn't understand why God doesn't give the same amount of glory in heaven to everyone. I was afraid that some souls wouldn't be truly happy. So she had me bring Papa's big glass and set it next to my tiny thimble. She filled both with water and asked which looked more full. I told her they both seemed equally full, and that you couldn't pour more water into either without overflowing. Then she explained that in heaven each soul is filled to the brim with joy, and no one envies anyone else. That's how she revealed the deepest truths to me in ways I could understand, feeding my soul with exactly what it needed. How joyful I was each year when the day came for the end-of-term prize ceremony. Even though I was the only one competing, justice was always upheld. I only received the rewards I truly deserved. My heart would beat so fast as I waited to hear the verdict, and when I received my prizes and crowns from my father's hands, with the whole family watching, it felt to me like an image of the Last Judgment. Alas, as I saw my father's radiant smile, I had no idea of the great trials that lay ahead for him. But one day, God gave me a vision extraordinary and unforgettable that showed me, in advance, the image of the sorrow to come. My father was away on a trip and wasn't expected back for a while. It was around 2 or 3 in the afternoon. The sun was shining brilliantly, and all of nature seemed to be rejoicing. I was alone, standing at a window that overlooked the vegetable garden, daydreaming happily, when suddenly I saw a figure outside the laundry room directly across from me. It was a man dressed exactly like Papa, tall with the same walk, but stooped over and aged. I say aged because his whole appearance seemed worn, though I couldn't see his face. His head was covered with a thick veil. He walked slowly and steadily along the edge of my little garden. At once I was filled with a supernatural fear, and I cried out in a trembling voice, "Papa! Papa!" But the mysterious figure didn't seem to hear. Without turning, he continued walking toward a cluster of pine trees that divided the garden path. I waited to see him emerge on the other side, but the vision vanished. The whole thing had lasted only a moment, but that moment engraved itself so deeply in my memory that even now, years later, it's as vivid to me as when it happened. My sisters had been together in the next room, and when they heard me call for Papa, they too felt something unsettling. Marie, hiding her concern, ran to me and asked, "Why are you calling Papa? He's in Alençon." I told her what I had seen, and to calm me down, they said it was probably the maid playing a trick, hiding her head under her apron to scare me. But when we asked Victoire, she said she hadn't left the kitchen. And in my heart I knew the truth. I had seen a man, and that man had looked exactly like Papa. We all went outside to check behind the trees, but of course there was no one there. My sisters told me to forget it. Forget it? That was impossible. The vision stayed with me. Over and over, I imagined it and tried to lift the veil from its hidden meaning. Deep in my heart, I was sure that one day I would understand it completely. And now, dear mother, you know all. You know that what I saw was my father. God had shown him to me aged and bent, marked by the great suffering that was to come. Just as the holy face of Jesus was veiled during his passion, so too would the face of his faithful servant be hidden during his time of humiliation, so that it might shine more gloriously in heaven. Oh, how I admire the way God leads us. He showed me that cross in advance, the way a father might hint to his children at the glorious future he's preparing for them, delighting in the rich inheritance they'll one day receive. But now I ask myself, why did God give such a vision to a child who, had she understood it, would have died of sorrow? Why? It's one of those impenetrable mysteries we'll only understand in heaven, where it will become a subject of eternal praise. Oh my God, how good you are! How perfectly you match the burden to our strength. Back then, I couldn't even bear the thought that Papa might die. I remember one day he was up high on a ladder, and I stood nearby. He said, "Move away, my little queen. If I fall, I'll crush you." But I was filled with a kind of revolt and stepped even closer to the ladder. I thought, if Papa falls, I want to die with him. I can't bear the pain of seeing him die without me. I cannot describe how deeply I loved my father. Everything about him filled me with admiration. When he shared serious thoughts with me, as though I were already grown, I would tell him, in all innocence, "Of course, Papa, if you spoke like this to the important men in the government, they'd make you king. Then France would be happier than it has ever been. But you would be sad, since all kings are sad, and then you wouldn't be my king anymore. So I'd rather they never find out about you." Around the age of 6 or 7, I saw the sea for the first time. It left a profound impression on me. I couldn't take my eyes off it. Its majesty, the roaring of the waves, everything spoke to my soul of God's greatness and power. I remember standing on the beach when a man and woman stared at me for a while. They asked Papa if I was his child and told him I was a very pretty little girl. Immediately, Papa signaled to them not to flatter me. I was pleased by this, because I didn't think I was pretty. My sisters had always been so careful never to say anything that might spoil my simplicity or childlike innocence. I believed them entirely, so I didn't give the strangers' compliments or admiring glances a second thought. That evening, as the sun sank into the sea, leaving behind a golden path on the water, I sat with Pauline on a deserted rock. I watched the shining track for a long time while she told me it was like grace, lighting the way of faithful souls through life. Then I imagined my heart in the middle of that golden path, like a little boat with a graceful white sail. And I resolved never to take my eyes off Jesus, so that my little boat could sail peacefully and swiftly toward the shore of heaven.